Hi, this week's Torah portion is Vayechi, and we're going to be looking in our Hevruta booklet, pages 28 through 30. This week's Torah portion doesn't have a complex plot, doesn't have as many storylines as the portions that we've been looking at previously. It really focuses on the death of Jacob, which is interesting because the very first word of the Torah portion, which is the name of the portion, Vayechi, translates as, and he lived. So we're talking about the death of Jacob. Right before he dies, he puts his hands on his grandsons, Joseph's children, Manasseh and Ephraim. And Ephraim is his younger son. Traditionally, the patriarch would put his right hand on the older son to bestow the bigger blessing on the oldest son. But Jacob, as he's giving the blessing, switches his hands. So it's interesting because every Friday night, when traditionally we say a blessing on our sons, we say, may you be like Manasseh and Ephraim. But we don't really know why we say that. Why do we say like Ephraim and Manasseh? We don't know much about them. We don't know their story the way we know Jacob, Isaac, Abraham. So what is it about them? Some of the rabbis suggest that just like in Torah, there are all these wars and rivalries between siblings. There are so many fights between brothers, between sisters. Manasseh and Ephraim, you never hear about them fighting, even though their grandfather switched his hands and gave the primary blessing to the younger son. They still don't fight. And so maybe that's the biggest blessing. May you have the peace of Manasseh and Ephraim and accept whatever blessings come your way, instead of always bemoaning what your brother or sister or someone else or your neighbor got that you don't have. So we have that switching of the hands. You could argue that all of Torah is really an attempt to overturn the tradition of bestowing the most blessings on the older child. You see, King David was the youngest of his brothers. Moses is younger than Aaron. Cain was the older brother of Abel, and you see how bad Cain turned out. The whole Torah seems to favor the younger, even though in that place in the world and in a lot of human history, it's the older who is favored. Now, in this Torah portion, I included a little bit of text. The reason I did that is because there's something interesting here. You see the word that has the square around it, the rectangle around it. That's the beginning of the Torah portion. And what's unusual about this Torah portion is that it doesn't begin with a paragraph break. There's no break in the text before it just begins. And so the rabbis comment on that, and they wonder, why is it sealed? Why isn't there a break? And they say because we're right now in between. We're on the borderline between the past and the future. So this is the very end of the book of Genesis and the beginning of the book of Exodus. And even though a lot of time passes between those two, they're directly connected to each other. This could be an opportunity for you to share how little Hebrew you know with these kids. I think it might even be comforting to them to know that you can teach Torah and really not know Hebrew. But what you do know is that, look at the text. Even without reading the text, we know that there are no vowels and there's no punctuation. So there are none of the little dots, which are the vowels. And there's no punctuation. You could see that there's no punctuation even if you can't read it. So what does that mean? That means that there's a lot of room for interpretation no matter what. There's a big difference between the sentence, it's time to eat, comma, grandma, and it's time to eat grandma. Totally different connotations. So punctuation can change a lot of things. So the interpretive part of Torah, all of the interpretation that we're doing, is actually stuff that we need to do because no one knows the original intent of the story. We're all trying to figure it out. Another thing is that there are no vowels, and vowels come from our spirit, right? When you speak a vowel, it comes from our breath. But a consonant comes from our body. It's our lips, our tongue, our teeth, our throat, gutturals. And so what we have in front of us when we look at the Hebrew is we have the body of the story, but it doesn't come to life until we speak it. So at their bar mitzvahs one day, when they chant from the Torah, they're going to put their breath into these letters, just like God put God's breath into Adam and brought him to life. And these stories, the more we talk about them, the more we contribute our breath, the more we bring them to life. So what else is there to talk about in this section? We can talk about how in the Mita section, it says contentment with your lot. Who is rich? One who is happy with his lot. It's very hard to do. We've just come through all of the holidays, consumerism, everything we see on TV is trying to tell us, oh, you need more, you need more. We're updating all the time, upgrading. And the rabbis say, he who gets 100 wants 200. So how do we find satisfaction with what we have? How do we find worth in what we have? We might not be the best student. We might not be, we might practice piano for years and years and someone else learns it faster. But how do we see our own worth? How do we be happy for the blessings that we have? Maybe an exercise in counting blessings. What are we grateful for that we have? And instead of constantly yearning for what others have. There's a wonderful quote here. It says, too many people are worried about their own stomachs and other people's souls when they should be worried about their own souls and other people's stomachs. So what does that mean? It means that there are people who are starving. We should be concerned about people who are starving instead of thinking about, I wish I had a second piece of dessert. We should be concerned about other people's physical needs and our own spiritual growth, our own mindfulness, our own learning, instead of only worrying about our own physical needs and increasing our stuff. It shouldn't be about our stuff. It should be about other people's stuff and about our growth, right? It also says, among all the things which God created in the universe, nothing is useless. So we might think things are useless, but they're not useless. A snail might end up being discovered to be a cure for something. So this might be a good opportunity to share some examples of things that look useless, but actually serve a really important purpose. And finally, because it's the death of Jacob, we could venture into the difficult subject of loss. And what are the ways in which we comfort one another, show up for each other, listen to each other? In Jewish tradition, you're not supposed to walk into a house of mourning and ask somebody who's lost someone, how are you? Because how are they supposed to answer that question? And we don't want to put them on the spot. But we are supposed to just be with them and maybe ask them to share a story. Tell me a story about your dog that you lost so that I can get to know him better. Tell a story about this person that you loved so much. But how are you? Even though that's what we instinctively want to say, that's not what we're supposed to say. So those are some thoughts about Vayechi. And again, thank you so much for teaching.